Welcome back to the CPO Festival. It's great to have you with us. Now we're going to dive into our first panel discussion, which is tackling defining and executing your product vision, strategy, and roadmap. Be sure to get your notepads ready and don't be shy in asking your questions to the speakers. They want to hear from you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CPO Festival, the Chief Product Officer Festival, here hosted by the Product-Led Alliance. We're delighted to have you with us today, so thank you very much for joining. I'm James, I'm the Community and Events Director here at the PLA, and I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you before we dive into the first panel. A few housekeeping announcements. We have a Slack community with 7,500 members now, so do come and join that. You can access that if you go to productledalliance.com. You'll be able to jump off there and join the free Slack community. You'll also find lots more at our website. There's loads of content and there's an option for memberships. We've got loads of interviews, we've got loads of white papers, really useful resources on there, so I do encourage you to check that out. We also have an in-person event for CPOs that's coming up in London, and that's on December 1st. So if you enjoy what you see today and you want to come and join us in person in London on December 1st, you'll be able to jump off from productledalliance.com, just go to the event and you'll find the CPO Summit London there as well. Now, without any further ado, we can move straight into the first panel of the festival. So I will invite our panelists to join me on stage, and whilst they're doing that, I'll give you a quick synopsis. So as Ruth mentioned in the video there, we're going to be first exploring a session titled Defining and Executing Your Product Vision, Strategy and Roadmap. So a really nice high-level strategic conversation to kick us off. I can see we've got the speakers joining us now. So I'm just going to ask them to go around and introduce themselves one by one. Now, Charlie, I can see that your microphone's unmuted already. So I'm going to come to you first, Charlie, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for us.
Great, thanks, James. Hi, I'm Charlie Buckley. I'm Vice President of Identity, Privacy, and Data Solutions at LiveIntent. LiveIntent is an advertising and marketing solutions provider to thousands of publishers and advertisers in the United States. And my team's tasked with providing emerging solutions to needs that are being created due to recent privacy initiatives. So we're helping our customers to continue to thrive in a post third-party cookie world, and also to deal with other impacts from privacy initiative. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Charlie. That's great. Ed, shall we come to you next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I've been working in product management for about 12 years now. First half of that was a lot in the game space, making social and mobile games, and then the second half has really been in marketplaces across scale-ups of various different types. Couple of kind of notable names there would be like Depop, where I was director of product, and that got sold to Etsy for $1.6 billion a couple of years ago. And slightly more recently, Job and Talent, which is a Spanish unicorn, where I was leading the product and design teams there. I'm currently interim CPO at Juno, which is a marketplace for finding top tier freelancers, so designers, copywriters, producers, those kinds of people.
Perfect. Thanks, Ed. And Mandy, coming to you next, you want to tell us a little about yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Mandy Steinmetz. I am the VP of Product at Muckrack. Muckrack is a platform that helps PR professionals connect and manage their relationships with the media, evaluate the success of their PR efforts, pitch to journalists, and much more. I've been in product management, I think, for about 15 years now. Before Muckrack, I was at Uptake, which is a company for predictive analytics for industrial. So wind turbines, predicting when they're going to fail, things like that. So it's great to be here.
Brilliant. And great to have you as well, Mandy. And last but not least, Rico, shall we come to you?
Hey, I'm Rico Surridge. Also fantastic to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer at Which, who are a UK not-for-profit organisation aimed at really sort of making life simpler, fairer and safer for consumers in the UK. Previously, I've run product engineering teams for the BBC, ITV, mostly in the kind of video on demand space. And I'm just super passionate about new product development.
Great, thanks, Rico. And I'm a recent customer of which actually we bought a new oven that was recommended on your website recently. So I'll thank you now for that, for the advice there as well, Rico. Great. So now we know a little bit more about our panelists, and we can go straight into the questions. And just to say, if you have your questions that you want to put to our panelists, then please do just drop them into the chat, and we will get through as many as those we can towards the end of the session. But you don't need to wait until the end to submit them. Drop them into the chat as you think of them, and we'll come back and cover as many as possible at the end. So that's your chance to ask questions. But first, I'm going to kick off with my question. And so my first question is really around how you can make sure that your product strategy is aligned with the wider business strategy and it's supporting those wider goals of the organization. Charlie, if we could come to you on that one first.
Great, thanks, James. One of the challenges that we have at Live Intent in my team is that we're dealing with emerging needs of our customers. So publishers and advertisers having to deal with the impacts of privacy regulations and helping them to continue to be able to engage with their customers and understand their customers. So we do a lot of work in research in the industry and what the competition is doing and what will support our customers. And then, of course, we make sure that we align with our company's North Star metrics, our objectives and key results. But what we frequently find when we go to our quarterly roadmap review and report to all of our stakeholders is that we hear things like, who asked for this? We usually hear this from the people who are closest to our customers, which can be a little bit disconcerting, right? They're the people that are making our product successful. This is sales, customer success management teams, marketing teams, etc. So what we've come to find is that we frequently don't have a misalignment of strategy because we've done our homework, but we have a perceived misalignment due to miscommunication. So what we've taken to doing, in along with presenting our typically dry, boring roadmaps, is doing a really deep dive and assessment of our customers' needs and pain points. So what we do is we combine a sort of product market fit approach and a solution selling approach. And then we look at each of our target customers. We look at the personas within those customers. So the buyers, the influencers, and the users of our products. And then we itemize all the different pain points, challenges, and goals that they may want to achieve. And then what we do is we recast our product features and initiatives in a solutions framework where we're presenting to those stakeholders what it is that we are delivering beyond just a product or feature or item on a roadmap. So what we found is that this formula really helps us get past that perceived misalignment, which is really just a miscommunication. And we've closed that gap. So once we started doing this, we had much better reception from our key stakeholders who are going to make us successful. And so, you know, there are other initiatives that we undertake, but I feel like this is one of the things that we really hit on that's helped us be successful.
Absolutely. And yeah, Rico, go ahead. Yeah,
I wondered if I might just build on. I mean, I think Charlie mentioned a range of fantastic points in there. I'll pick up on OKRs in the middle there. A little bit cliched, like we use OKRs at Which, we get on really well with them. Some people love them, some people loathe them. But fundamentally, I think on that sort of point of alignment, one of the things that we find really helpful is being able to draw really direct lines between the objective or the goal or the measure of success, whatever it might be, that a team is operating on, and those that we have kind of stated at an organizational level. And I think Charlie's absolutely right about communication and kind of visibility. And if you do that effectively at an organizational level, you know, we set OKRs at an org level annually and then at a team level quarterly. We find if you can really draw those lines, that makes an enormous difference to alignment. And then the second thing that we always insist on is with every particularly product engineering squad, you know, type team that we set up, we always ensure that we have a business sponsor that is from outside either product or technology. And we find that they can then both champion the work and be a key stakeholder and bring that voice to it, but they also then have a little bit of kind of skin in the game. They're not just the stakeholder that's looking in, they're the sponsor of that piece of work. And that creates a more kind of symbiotic, I think, sort of culture and environment that sort of breeds some of that success. So I wanted to jump in on that OKR point right off the bat because it's an important one, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm all for people jumping in, so feel free. Not at all. Mandy, I can see you were nodding your head in agreement there. I don't know if you wanted to build on that as well.
No, absolutely. Yes. So I also, one point that I was thinking about during that was really just being also part of the strategy, pulling product in from the beginning when that wider business strategy is being created. I think having that insight and being transparent and very aware of what we're trying to achieve not only helps product then circulate it and talk about it to the team so they really understand it and can be part of it. But it also helps ensure that from the beginning, those strategies are aligned. So you're not trying to retrofit them and figure out how to make the story come to life when it's much better if you kind of start from the beginning. So we've seen a lot of success in doing that and really having the key department leads part of even that original creation.
Yeah, so it sounds like actually this is something you need to think about really early on and make sure that you're doing it right from the offset rather than kind of reacting to it later down the road.
If you can. I mean, we had a great opportunity this past few months where we took a step back and really tried to take a fresh look at at our business strategy, our goals, where we want to be in the next 3 years. So that was a perfect opportunity to be part of that process and really make sure that everything that we're thinking about from the product and tech teams are reflected in that business strategy as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Ed, do you want to jump in? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I guess, I often work at companies that are, startup scale-ups, going through that growth journey. And the important thing there is really to ensure that everyone is kind of bought into having the same kind of audience that we're going after, the same value proposition, because that can change in companies that scale quite a bit as you're sort of finding out where your opportunity is. And obviously, if not everyone on the leadership team is on board with the right audience or the right, the same value proposition, that kind of completely pulls you off track. So it's quite common for perhaps sales to want to go after enterprise clients where they feel more comfortable, whereas marketing wants to go for more kind of like mass market segments where they feel more comfortable and they have very different needs that product can support. And then beyond that, just to echo what everyone else says, like really, I think what people want is they want transparency and they want input. So bringing them along the journey, making sure that you're transparent, gathering your analysis, like doing your research that will form your strategy, and then you give people the chance to input and kind of like guide you through that process. And then when you get to what are you actually going to build, you take the time to buy people into it. That can, often feels like it takes time up front, but it saves you a huge amount of time when you get less pushback and you actually get kind of positive buy-in from people driving or like wanting to drive the roadmap forwards, just as Rico was talking about having, stakeholders there as champions of the product work.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see how it's much wider than just product. You've got to bring people with you, and I suppose that work involves working very kind of collaboratively with other departments and making sure everything's aligned. And I thought, Charlie, your point about communication was really key for that as well. No, that's great. Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to explore as well is it's actually the common obstacles, right? So this is all great in theory and everybody wants to be able to do this, but we all know that when you get into the weeds and when you start implementing it, there's certain challenges that always seem to rear their head in different circumstances and different settings. And how you overcome those common obstacles when devising a product strategy can be a really key learning that I'd love for us to discuss and share with the audience. So Mandy, I wonder if we could come to you on that and ask what the common obstacles you found are and how you overcome those perhaps.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll really just reiterate, the alignment across the department leads and maybe offer a couple ways where at Muckrack we've been able to overcome those and find a really good dynamic and momentum between the department leaders. So of course, everyone has their own priorities and needs. So it's really hard to consistently bring everyone together to understand and agree to our priorities and make sure, certain new ones aren't coming in and blowing up what you have in place already. But so there's a couple of things that we've tried and are doing and is working really well. Just the frequent communication and collaboration. So every week meeting together. It does take time, but that's where we come together to talk about issues, to let product marketing talk about what they're doing, ensuring it's aligned with the different groups. So everyone's almost featuring and providing those updates and visibility into that work, so we can identify opportunities of misalignment as soon as they occur and correct them. And then, we also, because we're fully remote, which is amazing, we also miss out on being able to see each other in person. So even investing in that time together to bond and to really develop those relationships has helped a ton with keeping us aligned and building that trust between the senior leadership team. So those two things. And then I'll say finally, I think it's important to have a framework for when new things come up and things might need to be shifted. What does that look like? Who's in the room to talk about it and discuss it? And how do you make sure there's this process around there where people can either agree to change course or can push back and talk about it and stay on track.
I really like that idea about having the framework. So these things are going to come up. You don't necessarily know what they are, so you can't always preempt how to respond to everything, but you can preempt when things come up. This is how we're going to tackle it. I really like that idea. That's great. Ed, I can see you've come off mute. So did you have something to add on that, or any other common obstacles that people face?
Yeah. I guess a couple of common obstacles. Like first one, just to build on what Mandy was talking about. I've seen quite often in teams, you'll lay out like an amazing strategy, and then everyone will get very frustrated at the progress towards like delivering some of the big ticket items that are like heading in that strategy. And often what you find when you dig into what the teams are actually doing is that they're spending, 70, 80% of their time dealing with operational load or inbound requests. And so you've got to be tracking that sort of thing, like how much time are your teams actually getting to spend on planned work versus ad hoc requests or, maintenance, bug fixes, updates, things like that. And ensure they've actually just got the capacity to work on the strategy. And I think the other thing that I've seen is kind of a blocker to strategy is there's almost a prerequisite that, you have to have insights to be able to build a strategy. So if you don't have data that you can trust, and that's important, right? You might have an analytics platform in place, but actually if it's not being done properly and the data that you're getting out of it isn't true, then you don't have the insights to build a strategy on. If you don't have access to customers because it's really difficult to get them on the phone or go and find them, those are problems you have to solve up front. You have to put in that infrastructure for research and insights before you can even develop a strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, really, really good point. I couldn't agree more. I think that could be absolutely crucial. Rico, I can see lots of questions coming in the chat. We'll get to as many of those as possible. I might pepper a few in throughout, but most of them we'll try and tackle up at the end. But we've got some dedicated time. Rico, did you want to build on that as well?
Yeah, there are some great questions coming through. I was going to throw in sort of change management and kind of fear of change, because I think as you're developing those strategies, quite often you're talking to users, be those, the consumers, the customers of the experience, maybe those some of the internal staff as well. And more often than not, I've often come up against that challenge of fear of change. Either, we've always approached things a certain way. We've always had the proposition that I'm coming at this slightly from an organization that is, more than 60 years old at the moment. But equally, fear over jobs. How is my job going to change? What is going to happen that's going to be different as a result of this? And so you can see varying degrees of engagement, and people will go into those conversations with preconceived ideas of what that change might mean for them. And that can impact how those conversations flow and how that, then manifests itself in the vision and the tasks and things that come out of it. And so I think people often talk about change management as that thing that sort of happens kind of later on in the process. I actually think you need to bring some of that right up front, have some of those really honest conversations quite early on in order to dissolve some of the fear that's perhaps associated with the new strategy or some of the changes that are introduced through the strategy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously, Which has been through lots and lots of changes in its history and lots of different formats. And I imagine it's almost a completely different product and different business entirely from when it was first launched. So it's really interesting to see how that plays out in an environment where you've got a legacy systems and you've got people who've been with the organization for a long time as compared to, maybe a new company that's just set up or is a few years old. So yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting perspective as well. Charlie, did you want to add anything on the common obstacles?
Sure. Actually, I'll weave in one of the chat questions and pick up on a comment that Mandy made. One of the biggest obstacles that we have at Live Intent, we have 15 product managers and 4 development teams. The shared resources that we have to allocate make prioritizing all of the different tasks, issues, items coming from those 15 product managers almost impossible. So what we found is that creating a framework for visualizing the roadmap has been very helpful. And to use a Dilbert-esque term, we call it a marketecture. We essentially take all of the different products and features and try to bucketize them into a few common buckets that are very much solutions focused, so that we can see where each product manager's newest priorities would be collected in the progression of how our products are delivered, sold, and marketed. And what this allows us to do is not just visualize what we have, but when a new request is coming in, we can see sort of the evolution of our roadmap and where it would fit. Which bucket would it fit in? Is it a new bucket, or is it complementary to an existing bucket? And the question that I was going to refer to here is from Sierra, which is most effectively communicating the roadmap internally and externally. The marketecture slide can easily represent very complex product roadmaps very simply. And it allows you to take deep dives, if you would like, into each of the different buckets or solutions, or you can simply leave it at a very high level and say, this suite of solutions helps you understand your customers. This suite of solutions helps you engage with your customers. And so I find that that framework is helpful in a lot of different ways in dealing with issues, especially the one that I mentioned at the top, which is competing priorities with limited resources.
I think that's a challenge that I hear a lot about. It's that kind of competing with lots of different things we could prioritize, but which ones are we actually going to focus on when there's only so much you can do, right? And I'd be interested if any of the other panelists have thoughts on that. Like, how do you go about prioritizing those challenges? Mandy, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, great question. So there are lots of ways that we do it. I think we especially have to, it's always a great place to refer back to our strategy and to ask very clearly, like, does this align? Where does it lie? How is it going to move the needle forward? So I think it's really just having something to go back to and check against. Of course, we're looking at value and effort. But I think the most important thing is to just make clear, if something comes in, something else has to go out. So being able to put that forth and just say, that's fine. Like, we can absolutely, adjust to that. If there's true value there, if it makes sense. But of course, like, you have to set those expectations that can't just keep adding. We have to really make those hard decisions and figure out what needs to not get done because something else becomes a priority. So
I think that's a really good approach. Just in order to justify a new priority, you have to choose which one is more important than, rather than just saying, oh yes, everything's a priority. You have to say, actually, okay, what are we going to prioritize it over in order to make that priority? No, absolutely. Great. So in terms of something else I wanted to focus on is execution. So strategies all well and good. And I think we've kind of been touching on this a bit, that you can have a perfect strategy, but it also comes down to how well it's executed. It's only ever as good as its execution. So how do you ensure that the day-to-day activities are aligning with that strategy and therefore lead to a realization of that strategy? Rico, maybe we could come to you first on that one.
Yeah, sure. I guess 3 kind of sort of initial thoughts on that. So I think, first of all, there's lots of different when you've got a strategy and a product offering, maybe it's multifaceted, you've probably got a number of teams that are working towards that. And I think, first of all, really understanding understanding the delivery process for each of those teams is important. There are going to be probably parts of the product offering, maybe at a platform level, maybe not, where you want to be thinking perhaps a little bit more waterfall, dare I say it. And then there are going to be the parts of the product offering where you want to be thinking in a much more agile, iterative, value add kind of mentality. I think being quite clear about that up front, having a good understanding within the team and a good understanding with the stakeholders is really important. I think second thought would then be around really thinking about the cross-functional nature of those teams. Yes, in the obvious terms, particularly where it's a product engineering team, and they're probably operating in Agile, and they're probably iterating on something new with some tests, etc. You're going to have your product managers and your designer and your engineering leads, etc. But thinking beyond that and thinking about, well, if you're a content-led experience, how do you have one of the content team embedded in that cross-functional team? They're actively adding and contributing to it while also being a bit of a communication conduit back into their kind of business division. Same applies to commercial or whatever. It depends on the product space, really. And then third, I think for me, one of the most important things with any team that is trying to execute something is the point of communication. And the thing that I've always found most effective is having kind of a really routine and visible check-in forum. So all the product engineering teams at Which have a standardized fortnightly check-in. The exec leadership team come along to it. Everybody in the organization is invited to it. It's 45 minutes every fortnight. Anyone can come along. It's about 70, 80% discussion, 20, 30% kind of reporting and update. We only mandate a single slide, which has got things like their OKRs and a few other metrics on it. And beyond that, they've kind of got free rein to have a conversation. And I think having a heartbeat of a discussion forum where everybody knows where to go, what day of the week, where the slide deck is, flattens the org completely. And so I think if you understand your delivery mechanism, you've got a really cross-functional team, and you've got a really consistent cadence of check-ins and conversation, that sort of just brings everybody together. And execution will hopefully, managing risks, mitigating them, etc., will hopefully all kind of flow from there, really. So that's my top three thoughts on top of some of the other things we already talked about.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to your third point. Completely agree. That type of transparency, visibility, accountability is critical. And while we follow all of the Agile ceremonies and over communicate to the stakeholders in our team, we still find that there's sometimes confusion, concerns. If we miss a delivery, there's not necessarily trust in our explanation. So what we've come to start doing is creating a very simple visual representation on a monthly basis of the development and solutions engineering team's allocation. So each month we look at what each Scrum team has in terms of availability of staff, accounting for vacation time, holidays, and that sort of thing. And then for individual contributors, we'll do one for them. We create a stack chart for each of the teams or each individual contributor. And then we allocate the projects to each that they'll be working on. And so if you can imagine a stack bar chart where each team has, how many people will be available and which projects they'll be assigned that month. And then any projects that aren't allocated, we put in a sidebar so that it's immediately evident that these projects are not being worked on because we have resource constraints. And what we found is that this additional tool has helped us significantly in explaining why we missed a delivery because there was someone was on leave, or because we don't have the resources that we actually need to deliver these. And so that type of visibility has created trust, I would say. So I think it's another useful tool, very similar to what you described, Rico.
What we've been doing, or what I've been doing recently, is firstly the things that Rico mentioned, like setting the teams up for success. So is it clear what their individual team mission is, what their objectives are, how we're going to measure progress towards that objective? But then when we're actually kind of delivering things, I like to run like a dual track check-in. So I have one kind of product review check-in. So that'll be weekly or fortnightly, which is fairly similar to what Rico described. So it's all about making sure that as features go through certain checkpoints, like you have a kickoff, have you defined the problem properly? You have a review of like the solution, like is everyone happy with the solution that we've designed after discovery? And then, like a launch readiness kind of check-in, basically, like, are we ready with the go-to-marketing strategy, with the product marketing strategy, and so on? And then usually like an insights follow-up, like what do we learn once this thing has been live for a month? That check-in it's quite a broad audience. It'll include like lots of people, like stakeholders that are interested, marketing, customer service, and so on. What I found works really well is to have a separate check-in, which is a weekly check-in that is focused on delivery, and that's a much tighter group. So it's usually me as the product leader, an engineering leader, and then it's the product manager and the engineering manager from each Scrum team. And they get 15 minutes basically just to talk about what have they delivered in the last week. And we have a little template they can fill in, which basically tracks kind of what is the burn down on each of the things that they're working on, what is the amount of operational load that they've worked on, how many bugs have come up, these kinds of things that I've mentioned before. But by doing that in a separate forum and in a much smaller forum, you can have a really honest conversation about how is the team performing and what are the obstacles that are getting in their way. Then you find out, like, if one of the engineers is just like not performing, you can have that conversation in that group. Or if like the designer is just not keeping up with the pace of discovery, you can have that conversation. And it doesn't need to be, such a big deal that you're having it in front of the CEO and the chief marketing officer or someone else.
Yeah, I can see that making people feel a little bit more comfortable and able to be honest and not kind of cover themselves and just bring what the issues are and in a way that seeks solutions rather than kind of putting the pressure on there. So I think that's a really great idea, Ed.
Yeah, we actually, just to add on that, we often run it as almost like an office hours slot where we'll have an hour set aside even for 8 teams or something. And so based on the template, the little check-in, 5 minutes for each team to fill in, we'll then say, hey, these 4 teams, why don't you come and see us for 15 minutes? We don't see every team every week because a lot of the times everything's fine. We don't need to chat to them. But it means if they do need to chat with us, they've got that time. And quite often the teams will say, like, hey, can we have a slot? We want to talk to you about this thing. We just can't get a response from this stakeholder, or this isn't working, or like this technology route we've gone down is actually just not the right one. And we can then just have a very kind of collaborative problem solving chat with them.
Yeah, that's great. Mandy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I will maybe take a little bit, come at it from a different angle. So I think one of the biggest things I see is even the term product strategy is often misunderstood as this is our vision or this is our plan. So I think first explaining like this is how we believe we can succeed in a specific market. This is how we're going to have a competitive advantage, and this is our hypothesis. And then helping the teams understand how they can apply that to the day-to-day execution, how they can use that as a way to make prioritization decisions, how they can help find the best solutions to those problems. The more we can enable them to have the information they need to come up with the best path to get to those longer term goals, I think is a great approach, at least from the start. It is a lot of time investment to really socialize the strategy, make sure people understand it from every department. But I think it really pays off, because if they really have that clear understanding of where you're going and why, then you can you're not handling as many questions that come up later as why are we doing this, or what's the purpose, or I gave this feedback, why didn't you act on it? I think a lot of those things actually are prevented if you ensure that everyone across the company is not only aware of the strategy, but is really behind it. And you get the feedback of where it doesn't make sense or where it isn't clear. And then you can kind of address those issues as they come up and just make sure everyone really feels part of the strategy. So I think we've been focusing on that, putting a lot of time into it, and it's really helping everyone understand how their day-to-day connects to that larger strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. I'm just going to throw in one of the audience questions as I think this came through in response to Rico maybe, but anyone feel free to join in with it, because I know we've built on the conversation since then. But Tronya says, can you elaborate on the OKRs and metrics that you go through in that fortnightly meeting? I know you said you keep it quite tight and it's just a kind of one slide, but could you elaborate on what those are?
Yeah, I'll kick off, and then it sounds like some others use similar forums. So in the fortnightly check-ins that I was talking about, so that's we apply those predominantly to our product engineering team, so your classic kind of 2 pizza sized team, etc. And it tends to be the 1 or 2 key results for the quarter that we really focus on. And a little bit to what Mandy was speaking to there, depending on the area of the proposition or the problem that that team is set up to solve, what is the outcome that they are trying to drive from the work they're doing? What is their measure of success? And we try, we have a 4-box grid. Top left is what is the OKR? What is the key result that they are really trying to drive from that piece of work? And it is almost always an outcome, and it is almost always something that then ladders up to an organizational goal or objective for the year. They really vary, though. I mean, if it's a platform team, it might be a really different type of metric to if it's something that's really centered around kind of growth and engagement. So they vary quite a lot. Let me just read can you elaborate on the OKRs and metrics you go through in that fortnightly meeting? So it tends to be a per team, I suppose, basis.
And do you involve the team in defining or deciding what those metrics are going to be? Do you include them in that?
I mean, that's quite an interesting question in its own right, isn't it? I mean, in our case, absolutely. The team write their own objective. I mean, the team write their own mission, their own strategy, outcome-based roadmap over a number of years, and absolutely write their own objectives and key results for the quarter. Those do get sanity checked, both at a kind of a peer review level. So each quarter, all of the product engineering squads will come together, peer review the objectives, key results they've been putting together, and we'll then have a quarterly forum where those are then also reviewed up against the organizational objectives with the exec co-sponsors, just to make, just a sanity check, very much in the spirit of collaboration, that the things that all the teams are doing, that we set the right goalposts. And that's usually the biggest benefit of things like OKRs. You have all of the crunchy conversations up front. You're really clear on what it is you're trying to drive. And that's what then allows for the greater autonomy. That means, okay, we can try some different solutions. We can, play around with some different features and see what moves the dial on the metric that's been set. If you can agree that metric up front, that kind of paves the way, I think, for a lot of the ways of working that in some organizations can be quite challenging to instill.
Absolutely. Did anyone else want to add anything on that question around what specific metrics you use? Otherwise, we can move on. One area that I wanted to explore, I know I'm conscious of time because we've got so many great questions in the chat that I want to get through as many of those as possible. So if you've got more, just drop those in there. But there's probably the last one from me, I think, that I'm conscious that you want to make sure that the customer or the user is at the heart of your product strategy. And I'd be interested to know about the steps that you can take to try to ensure that that's the case. How do you make sure that that customer, that user is really central when developing a product strategy? So I'd be interested in all your thoughts on that, but maybe Ed, if we start with you.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question because, if you don't have the customer kind of front and center of everything that you're doing, then, it's really difficult to do anything worthwhile. And I think the answer to this is different in different companies, but maybe I'll share a few examples of things that have worked really well for me in different situations. So at Wooga, which was a games company, we had about 10 different teams working on different games, and every week front desk would book 6-8 user testers to come in, and whichever team kind of had something to test would basically claim the slots. And so it meant that most teams were testing every week or every other week, regardless of what they'd shipped or what they developed. They just have those people in, and if they ended up testing stuff that had already been live, that was fine. It was just seeing how people reacted to stuff the whole time. At Depop, so that was a social fashion marketplace. This was in the office, so it was before the days of remote, but every squad had its own area in the office, and every squad would then put up the kind of the key insights, the funnels, the quotes from user interviews, the analysis they'd done on the wall around the squad space. And it meant you could just walk over to the team and you could see how they were thinking about things, and you could see what was important to them. And you could kind of be like, hey, there's a big drop off in the funnel here, but you don't have any quotes. What's going on? And so it became a very spontaneous conversation about how they were thinking about the customer, but it was always literally right there in their faces. And third example I'll give is Job and Talent. So Job and Talent was a digital staffing agency providing blue collar workers, so a lot of factory workers, a lot of delivery drivers, things like that. And that had a very, very strong culture of doing site visits. So, like right from the CEOs down, they very often just pick on people and be like, when was the last time you were on site? Like, you were expected to go out and visit the warehouses and visit the kind of the delivery hubs where the workers that we were placing were actually working, and speak to them, speak to their line managers and placements, and see how they were finding things, and understand their lives, and not just the way that they were using the digital product. So just 3 examples of things that we've done kind of along the way.
Mandy, I could see you nodding again about the site visits there. It seems like, is that something that you found as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For me personally, there's nothing like going out to a wind farm and climbing a wind turbine to really understand the life and what they go through and their challenges. So I think that's absolutely critical. I also think having the product managers talking directly to customers regularly. I've been at other places before Muck Rack where it was more of the account managers or customer success that was on the front line. So a lot of times the product managers didn't have that direct connect to the customers. All the feedback they were getting was secondhand. And so I've seen such a difference when you are talking to them directly and you feel that accountability and passion for helping to solve their problems versus not. So I think that's extremely important. And then I would just say making user research part of the culture, really educating everyone on, here's what we found in this research. Here's how we use it. You can also use it this way. How can sales use it? How can marketing use it? So almost integrate it in every part of the company and it really helps show its own value to them and allows everyone to be keeping the user at the front and center.
Absolutely. Thank you. Charlie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on kind of that question around how do you put the customer at central to the strategy?
Absolutely. So one of the unique things at LiveIntent is that not only do we have to appeal to the customer initially to make the sale, and so using the tools that we've all talked about, and I've brought in product market fit, solution selling, and the marketecture, we are crafting solutions that even may appear customized to the customer to make sure that they understand the value to them immediately. But one thing that's unique about our products is that we are very much involved in ingesting data from our customers and giving data back to them. So we are helping them take their first party data and helping identify who those customers are, enriching their data, and then helping them find those customers in the digital world on televisions, on web, on emails, and things like that. And what we refer to that is an ongoing value exchange, right? So we can't just appeal to the customer at the point of sale. We have to continue to have this engagement because if they stop giving us their data, then we stop providing value back to them. So some of the tools that I mentioned allow us to customize their solution in a way that they'll find that continuous value provided to them. So it can be that we have features like a dashboard or a report that we provide to them that we might not have to provide to every customer, but it's in our architecture. So when we craft that solution, we get a sense of what their needs and goals are, and then we find something that we can give to them as well as part of the solution that will demonstrate the value in an ongoing fashion. So not just closing the deal and moving on and hoping they renew, but continuously providing them the insight into the benefit that we're providing. So I think that's important to note in making sure that they're at the heart of your strategy. It's not just closing the deal, but it's in continuing to engage with them.
Absolutely. So it's an ongoing process. And Rico, I saved you until last because as a Which customer, I'm particularly interested in your answer to this one. So how do you go about that, putting that customer at the heart of your strategy?
There we go. Just finding the unmute button. A number of ways. I mean, we've talked about a few of them here. I see someone's just asked the question about kind of user research. We absolutely have user research as a part of product. We treat those user research roles slightly differently in that when we structure a squad, user research isn't an embedded member of the squad, but they do work across a number of squads, and that allows them to kind of circulate, get a range of perspectives, and do a degree of coaching into those teams as well. But I think you can't really spend enough time with the users of your kind of products and services, can you? And I think whether you're doing that at quite a granular level or whether you're seeking feedback at a strategic level, which I think you can do as well, absolutely, and often doesn't sort of come to mind, I don't think, when you're putting together a product strategy to actually just go out and ask your users for feedback on that. But then all of the great tools that we're familiar with, like how might we statements or user stories, or these types of things that just put everything in the context of the user and the problem that you're trying to solve for them. We use a bunch of things like problem framing, kind of design thinking, etc. I think all of the there's so many great frameworks and tools out there that can help support this.
Great, and I think we'll probably move on to some audience questions now. So feel free, panelists, to jump in as and when you feel. But I just wanted to see if you'll see Rick put that question in there as well, which Rico, so you touched on, but I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of comment on that as well. Whether you have product executing user research, or do you have user research teams? How do you embed them together? How do they interact? If anybody else wants to add in on that.
Yeah, I can jump in. So at Muckrack, because of the nature of our product and how it's fully embedded into, it's really about creating stories and telling stories together and connecting on that. It's personal in nature. So Muckrack, as in the past year, has invested a lot into user research. We had a team of 1 when I started a year ago. There's now 9. So, and that's of course user experience, visual design, as well as user research. So we've seen such a difference in just the techniques and the information and analysis of the data by having that user research team. So I really think they bring just such a unique perspective and way of approaching it, which as product managers, like, it's a little bit more difficult to be able to separate yourself and play that role. So I definitely think that if you can, if you are able to, then having the user research team is there. I also think there's opportunities to have the user research team train the product managers on best practices and ways to ask questions so they're not leading. That can allow for, if you're strapped, we only have 2 and we have several teams. So how do you best spread that knowledge and allow others to play a similar role with the resources that the user research team has provided?
Great, thanks, Mandy. So looking through some great questions here, I'm just going to pick and choose as we go, and we can take them as we come. So I saw one from Warren, which was about reflections on impending layoffs at various different tech companies. But I thought it might be interesting to broaden that out a little and kind of say, from the lens of product strategy, we know that you have to remain flexible. You can't decide what your strategy is and then it stays like that forever, because there's changes in markets, there's changes in competitors, users change. So how can we kind of respond to whatever that change may be without becoming too reactive and departing too much and changing our strategy too much too often? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on how to remain flexible whilst still sticking to your strategy. Ed, looks like you might have something there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to bear in mind that your product teams are a big investment that the company's making. I generally tell my teams that a typical team of 6 to 8 people, 6 to 10 people will be like order of magnitude £1 million a year or $1 million a year to run, right? So whatever they're doing has to be pretty high value to get a return on that investment. And then the question is like, if you've got a team that's like just dealing with client requests or like serving a sales team, is that delivering that kind of value and that kind of return? Because if it is, maybe that's fine. But then you also need to think about, what is the opportunity cost? Like, could they be doing even more valuable things if they weren't doing that? So I guess that's sort of like some of the kind of mental frameworks I use to think around it. Is like, what is the highest impact that they could, things that they could be working on? And is that high enough impact to really deliver a return on the investment the company's making in the product team?
Absolutely. There's a similar question, a similar vein from Tonya, who says, what are the key drivers to avoid being a response-led product team and becoming a team executing on a focused vision. Does anyone want to take that one?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. In the product space that I'm in with emerging technologies, we frequently are presented with new opportunities that I refer to as shiny new things. So frequently our stakeholders bring those to us as potential solutions to some of the problems that we're trying to address. And going back to my architecture, if you have an easy to understand and consume digestible representation of your roadmap, you can help distinguish whether this shiny new thing will actually provide any traction or stickiness and become a sticky new thing. And so we like to remain flexible, especially since many of the stakeholders are on the executive team who bring these to us. And so what we can do is quickly assess what the shiny new thing would contribute, where it would fit in our architecture, and whether it should go into the backlog or should be inserted into our current product strategy, because it would have a stickiness or provide us with traction in achieving our current objectives.
I really like that idea. How assessing whether the shiny new thing is going to become a sticky new thing, I think, is a crucial thing to get right. So no, that's really interesting. Thank you. Just having a look in the chat again. So Jonathan said, how do you align on an effective product vision or mission statement? Anybody have any thoughts on that one?
Well, just to jump in, I guess we've touched on alignment quite a bit now, and it depends on who you're aligning between. I mean, I think if it's in team and a product manager and a designer, I think it comes down to the frequent in the tech lead, the difference between the solution architecture and what is all of these things can impact each other, and I think that's just got to be really frequent conversation, discussion, and alignment around the goal. I think if it's alignment between the vision and the mission that a team are putting together relative to some of their stakeholder group, I think that's probably similarly a lot about communication and making sure that you're all on the same page about what you're trying to achieve. And then I think if it's the vision and the mission versus externally what it is people are actually consuming and what their expectations are of, if you've got a member base or something like that, like we have, again, it's probably down to, maybe there's a theme here. It's just about talking to people and having a real conversation around it and being very honest and upfront and doing that nice and early. You don't want to be having that conversation at the point at which you're releasing something or at the end of a quarter or something like that, because that's when you end up with the tension and the misset expectations. And that's when you don't want those crunchy conversations, ideally.
Yeah, I think the idea of communication is definitely coming across as a key theme for sure. Absolutely. And there's a couple of questions I wanted to go to next that were around roadmaps. So the first one was from Abhinav, and Abhinav says, what's your thoughts on a 10-year product roadmap in addition to the current one? It's quite a long view, long-term vision in a 10-year product roadmap.
I can take a stab at that. So instead of a roadmap, what we've done recently at Muckrack is put together more visual concepts. So wireframes that have clear, these are mock-ups only for illustrative purposes, but we have put those together because I think pictures are a much better way to illustrate or to communicate that vision without having specific features and specific solutions, because we all know in 10 years, everything will change. So I think it's really just how to still provide, what's the best way that your company, your teams will be able to digest and understand where we're going and why. And for us, at least, having a couple visual concepts have really helped to illustrate that vision.
I think to build on what Mandy's saying there, I think this is a really nice place where you can use the kind of pre-written press releases as well, kind of same idea. But I think that 10-year beyond horizon, writing the press release for how you want your organization to be perceived or some of the outcomes you want to have driven over a 10-year period that's quite, I know it's, again, we hear it from Amazon, etc. It's quite a nice, I find it works quite well at that kind of time horizon.
Yes, very aspirational, right? It depends on what industry you're in as well, right? Because in the industry that I am in, we're having to respond to the actions of companies like Google and Apple, and it would appear externally that they don't even have 3-month roadmaps based on some of the actions that they take. So, a 10-year roadmap for my company would be very much aspirational and very much in the lines of a press release of where we would like to be, who we would like to grow up to be.
I think there's some different needs here about, you know, what do you want a roadmap for? And that's basically, I think generally companies want a sense of direction, like where are you headed? They want a confidence that you're actually making progress towards that vision. And then they need sort of some kind of heads up in the short term about what is about to be released and they need to support or kind of like be aware of. And so I wouldn't think of a roadmap as necessarily sort of like, you know, a beautiful Gantt chart that this feature is going to take 3 months and the next feature is going to take, you know, 2 weeks. And like, but can you answer those questions? Have you got a kind of a sense of like, hey, this is the future we're building, and maybe that's a set of mock-ups or a prototype or a, you know, just a word statement. Yeah, can you kind of generate confidence about stuff is moving in that direction by, and the most important thing you can do there is just release regularly things that have value, and you know, when you make commitments, actually hit them, and then give people kind of those immediate timelines by saying, okay, this thing that we're already working on, we've done the work up front, we've done the estimates, we've done the technical spikes, we can be confident it's going to release at the end of June, and we need marketing to be ready to support us at that time. So, but having that kind of certainty further out, I would try and steer away from that, because I don't think it has any value for the organization, and it's quite difficult to do as a product team. And so it ends up being quite a lot of wasted effort.
I completely agree with what Ed's saying there. I think the thing you've got to remember, of course, is that you've got to build a certain amount of credibility in order to get to the position where you've kind of got permission to do that. And I think, having worked for a number of slightly older organizations, you're still in those situations going to have a CFO that goes, yeah, okay, that's lovely, but where's, you know, what are you delivering in Q1 and Q2 and Q3 and Q4? And I think the only way you begin to move away from that is by demonstrating, probably with one team to begin with, you know, these are the outcomes that we're seeking to solve for. Here are some of the things that we might try in order to do that. And you kind of have to build that credibility and get to that point that Ed's talking. I mean, I think Ed's spot on, but you have to, dependent on the organization, build towards that. I think it's just some of the stuff that we're talking about is really, really tough to get right.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I think that's about all the time we have. I did see one last question here that I thought was quite funny, which was from Rick, which is related, that said, how do product teams manage to work on 10-year visions when the day-to-day is busy enough? And I'm sure everyone will have a lot of sympathy for that. So, yeah, I just wanted to mention that as well. But we're out of time, unfortunately. So all that really remains for me to say is thank you. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I thought it was a really, really interesting conversation, and I think you can see that reflected in the questions that were coming through as well. So thanks for taking the time to join me today and to tackle all of those thorny issues. And thank you to the audience as well for joining us and for submitting those questions and for taking part in the discussion. We really, really appreciate it. So we will be moving on to our next session. So the room will open in about a minute's time, and there'll be a little wait just while we get everything set up and ready. But that'll start in about 15 minutes. So when this session ends, it'll send you back to the agenda. You can get into the next room and wait there, and it will begin in about 15 minutes time. So I look forward to seeing you in the next session. And once again, thank you to all of our wonderful panelists today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.